Belgium, Waterloo. The Allies are preparing to confront Napoleon's French in battle. The Guards have been given the task of holding a key feature on the right of the line. And this is the story of one Guardsman's battle.
Guardsman Matthew Clay is the youngest man I've got. He's keen, wants to do well, is always asking questions. Constantly. Wants to know the detail of everything. To start with, I thought that was, nerves or something because he was worried about the fight. But you should see the letters he writes home. They're massive. I've said it, there are pages and pages of them. I am surprised he's got enough room for socks in his bag. He carries so much paper with him. I remember he asked me once, Sarge, why is it that you fight? Is it because you love God and your country and the king? No, it isn't. It is because that king, in his infinite wisdom, decides to give me 1/4 of a pint of rum a day. I fight so well, young Clay, because I'm drunk. I get back in line and shut up. I is always asking. And today, he asked another. After the battle, he asked how his friends died. And I'm going to have to tell him. See, I was there, although he was not. He was at the battle, but he missed a scrap at the farm. I didn't see how his friends met their end, and so I am going to have to tell him. And in doing so, I'll be forced to relive it. It'll become packed, distinct, an easy story to tell, and a too easy story to remember. I joined up in Edinburgh in 1799. And so, by the end of 1814, I've been fighting the French for very nearly 15 years. 15 years across all the known world. Across Portugal and Spain and Egypt. And finally, in 1814, we had him surrounded. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican tyrant, trapped in Paris. And he surrendered. At last, it's time to make him pay for everything he's done to us. And what do? To punish him, we banished him to an island in the Mediterranean, full of beaches. We didn't do it alone. No, we can't leave him alone. We might not know what he does. So, we left him with 100 of his personal guard. Left on a lovely island in the crystal blue waters of the sea with beaches and 100 of your friends. That's no punishment. That's a holiday. However, it seemed after a year of all this hell, Napoleon Bonaparte didn't want to stay. So he came back. And every single army that was sent to deal with him by the Bourbon monarchy went over to his side. So once again, it's up to us. It's up to us, the British and our allies, to push the French back. We first fought them at the crossroads. Oh, that was a lovely day. Bright, sunny. We fought long and hard amidst the cornfields, and with a great cheer of the lads, we pushed them back. And the younger amongst us, of which there were too many men who had not fought in the peninsula or in Spain. He thought, was that it? Was that the French, is it? You old soldiers have been going on about all these years. The ones that you're so afraid of. Well, that was easy. That was it was easy. A piece of cake. We set out, outside in the corn like it was a picnic. Eating, smoking, drinking. And as the sun went down, so the chorus of the wounded went up, Matthew Clay asked if he could get some water, put it in his canteen, and maybe feed it to the wounded. I said he could. He went down to the lake nearby and came back only minutes later, being sick. Turns out the lake was full of the dead. Nobody wanted to drink that water. It would do them no good anyway. Next morning, despite the victory, Despite the conviction of many of the lads that we had done it, that we had won, we got news that a larger French force, this time commanded by Napoleon himself, was moving in on our position. We were outnumbered, outflanked, outgunned, and there was no alternative but to go back, to retreat, despite our many victories. And that moment is when the sky chose to rain. Sheets and sheets of the stuff whipped into icy, stabbing knives by the wind. It slashed against men's uniforms and pounded the roads and the fields into sucking mud. Of course, despite this, it was my job as sergeant of the 3rd Foot Scots Guards to keep my lads moving. Come on, lads, I said, keep going, one foot in front of the other. Come on, lads, rain, rain. This isn't rain. This is good Scottish summer weather, this. I kept on going and shouting and cajoling and bashing them on the backs. And they're good lads for the most part. As, of course, Guardsman Matthew Clay, the youngest. Now, I put him in my company with Guardsman Gann. He's the oldest man. He's got skin like old paper and 2 huge white side whiskers like sheep that have attacked his face and then decided to stay there. He was walking along reciting verses from the Bible with Clay. And, of course, there's others. Brooker. Brooker's always laughing and joking, finds everything funny, even if it's not, He's a good shot. Many of the lads don't mind him teasing him so much. I mean, he should be in a rifle company by all accounts, but I'm glad he's in mine. And behind him, of course, came Philpot. Now, everyone's got a Philpot. Philpot is a whinger. He hates the rain. Mind you, Philpot hates it if it's too dry. He doesn't like it if it's too wet. He doesn't like it if it's too cold, if it's too hot, if it's too windy, if it's too still. Philpot would complain on a lovely summer's day with the breeze blowing in his face, because the sky would just be the wrong colour of blue, Sarge. A wan look from Sergeant Bryce McGregor soon shut him up, though. Oh, Bryce McGregor's not like me. No, McGregor is massive, huge. He's like a mountain with hands, and the grumbling of his voice was like the moving of the earth beneath your feet. And soon it was that Philpot found his mouth closing and his eyes dropping to the ground. I watched the lads march by, paying special attention, of course, to Leicester. Everyone's got a Leicester as well, a joker also, but scamming has always got something on the go, whether it's gambling or tricking the men out of their rations. Most of the time, Leicester's loitering at the back of the line, having a cheeky smoke. He thinks I can't see him because he's ducking down behind the line, despite the fact that A, he's got smoke coming out of his face, and B, he's 6'4". I kept them going all the way, through the rain, through the filth, through the mud. We moved with the rain drumming on our shackles, our shoes full of water, and our bellies completely empty, as no supplies had caught up with our column yet. We eventually stopped, cold, wet, and hungry, at the foot of a ridge. And we were sitting out there in the rain, waiting for morning. And as we did, we saw, across the plain, another ridge, but the whole of the French Imperial Army standing on its top, waiting. Well, at that point that we noticed them, one French cannon shot. A great and sudden explosion. Many of the men picked up their muskets, but as that one gun shot, every single cannon on the British and Allied ridge replied. Oh, the lads were cheering and waving their arms, and I told them to be quiet. This was no cause for celebration. If you look back on the line, you could see Wellington's men riding backwards and forwards in a great fluster and panic. For with one shot fired by the French, Napoleon, without great reply, had just found out the location of every single British gun. Now, me and the lads were clever. We're not artillery or cavalry, infantry. And we were sent on foot to occupy a farm. See, there were 3 farmhouses along the British line that would act like fortresses, bastions of stone, where men could hide and stand and fight. The farm that we were sent to look after, with some Coldstreamers, of course, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald, was called the Hougoumont. I remember we started making our defences, holes in the walls. We lined up men across them as well, filled the whole of the farmhouse with men, and include the gardens beyond and the hedges. There were some Nassau, some German skirmishers in the woods beyond that too. And there it was that we stood and waited for the French to come. An age, it seemed, until we heard them. It sounded like dry twigs burning, but it was the sounds of musketry. After a while, we saw the smoke through the trees, heard the shouts, screams, and the whistles, and then it was that the Germans moved back in a great panic, running toward the farm. And then the French arrived. A great blue tide of them, pouring out of the woodlands, all of them with their guns, screaming, howling like the very host of hell itself. They charged and yelled and screamed and didn't stop to shoot, but round toward the wall, out of the trees they came, 30 yards of open ground between us and them, and they no longer had any cover. So we fired. And fired. And fired. Men twitched and pitched forward like puppets with their strings cut, and still they came. Bodies were soon piled up like cordwood on that ground, and still they came, soldiers dodging between the bodies of their comrades fallen. Some of them, God knows how, managed to reach the wall itself, and putting their hands through the holes tried to take our guns. Well, those muskets spat back at point-blank range and hurled them like toys back into the fray. And it was just when I thought we could take no more of this that our artillery, firing case shot on the French, soon scattered them away from the farm. And once again we thought we were winning. And so the cheer went up, "Come on, lads, let's finish them off." We went back to the north, to the back of the farm, opened the gates, ran round our position, and charged after them. "Come on, lads, away we go." So it was as we ran out of the farm toward the trees, all the lads screaming and raising their muskets high, when we suddenly came upon a whole lot more French than we had been expecting. A whole battalion, in fact. Untested. Some of them weren't even ready. I could see them having their lunch, their tea, eating. The great cheer had gone up victoriously. "Go on, lads, go on." And now the panic cry echoed in the trees. "Get back, get back." And so it was that we ran back toward the farm. Now I stopped about halfway, dropped to my knees, and loaded my musket. I fired over and over again to protect my lads till they could get back. But then it was, in that moment, that out of the smoke and the fire, out of the screams and the battle, a great French colonel with a shiny sword riding a beautiful black horse rode out toward me and tried to cut off my head. My own beautiful head. What the indignity of it! I had been doing absolutely nothing except minding my own business and firing at his men. Well, I wouldn't have had this. I managed to dodge the colonel's first swipe, but his sword stuck in my shackle and cleaved it in two. Oh, great! I've lost my hat now, as well as trying to cut off my head. That's two. You will not get three, for no one assails me with impunity. I saw him, right? He rolled round back to try and get me. I got my Bessie, my good old brown base musket. I aimed it right at him. And the mainspring broke, the flint shattered, and as I swung up with the musket to try and protect my own head, he shattered the stock as well. The weapon was now virtually useless. I threw it to the ground and saw him wheeling around. He was coming back for another go, holding the sword low like a lamb's, like a knight of old, wanting to skewer me upon it, and my fingers plunged into the muddy earth, and I scrabbled around for anything I could find. My fingers closed around something, a staff, a spontoon, a spear, I don't know what it was, but I lifted it up, and with all the strength I could muster, I waited until the very last moment, and I swung! And I missed. Hit the horse, though. The horsey reared up, its hooves pounding at the air. The French colonel fell off and ran away. The horse did not. Horse stayed where it was. Here I was, in the middle of a battle, with smoke filling my eyes, choking my lungs, with bullets whizzing through the air like insects. In the midst of all of this, I was staring out a horse. All right. So, I walked up to it. Did nothing. I patted it on its flank. Did nothing. I took its reins in my fingers, and it did nothing. All right. So, I got on its back, and I rode it back into the farm. Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald! Colonel MacDonald, look what I've got. It's either a very beautiful horse or a very ugly Frenchie. I didn't laugh. He told me to get off and get back to the defences, which was fair enough. But it was at that time that I noticed that Clay and Gang, the youngest and the oldest, were not back, for they were trapped outside. And this is the bit that Clay wants to know. This is the part where his friends die, and he wants to know the details. This is the part he didn't see, and I, for one, am glad. For in moving back into the farm itself, and running out there to the trees, we had shown the French the way in. A large complement of light infantry had followed us round to the doors, and with a great pounding and beating and smashing on the door, they broke through, and the French poured inside our position. And a great cry went up, "Keep them out! Keep them out!" But it didn't do any good at all, for the guns fired one great volley, and the whole first rank went down. But more and more of the French poured inside the farm, like the whole of France itself had been unleashed upon us. And there was no stopping them. And the fighting was cramped inside the farm. You'd slip on the cobblestones and fall down and go underneath the bayonet's ribs or get crushed by a man. It was desperate and close and panicked. And in the midst of all of this, with more and more of them pouring in, Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald, a couple of the Irish lads with the Coldstreamers, I noticed were creeping along one wall, crouching, sometimes crawling, like it was a game of hide and seek. And I looked at the colonel and looked at where he was going. It was no game. I got Bryce McGregor, a couple of the other lads, even Lester, to join us. We moved along the other wall, creeping again our backs on that brick, and amazingly unnoticed by any of the French. And when we got to that wall, when we got to those gates, they hadn't seen us. We looked at each other across this seething sea of the enemy, still pouring inside. And we said nothing. I didn't need to. With a strength we didn't know we had. With a strength I didn't know I had. With a strength born out of simple desperation not to die and to keep the French out, we took the old and knotted wood of that gate against our backs and between our fingers, and we pushed against the gates. We heaved against the woods, and at first nothing happened at all. Nothing. It didn't begin to move against that tide of men, but then it began to slip and slither on the dirt, 1 inch, 2 inches, and it began to move. And the French realized what was happening. They began to scrabble and kick and scream and punch and claw, but they didn't want to die there. They didn't want to die here, as did no one. There comes an odd moment when you look into the eyes of the man you're fighting, just briefly, and see they are not demons. They are not devils. They're men. Just men who would rather be anywhere than here, who would rather live than die today. Like us. But we did our duty. We still pushed. We pushed anyway, as hard as we could, and the gates at last began to move 2, 3 inches, 6, and then with one final heave, the gates closed, slamming into position. One man even put his arm across the locking bar to secure it till he found the wood. And then we turned upon the French left alive inside the farm, and Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald, this gentleman, this man of infinite breeding, took one look at them, and he screamed, "Kill them, lads! Kill them all!" And we did. I fought until my sleeves were slick with blood up to the elbows. And I do not know how many men I killed. Although I do remember that a barrel of fruit had broken open and the apples lay crushed and trampled amidst the bodies of the dead. Blood made little rivers between the cobblestones. We killed every single Frenchman in that farm, save one. A drummer boy, not 14 summers old. He lay propped up against one wall, crying his bloody eyes out. The colonel joked with the lad in fluent French, said that there was no need for him to cry, as we had given up eating French drummer boys last year. The scene inside the farm was ghastly. And Clay wanted to know. Wants to know how his friends died defending that farm. Lester was with me at the gates, as was McGregor. The sergeant only got a scratch on his arm. I was completely untouched. Lester had a hole in his jacket, and a ball had gone through it. But not him. Brooker stood on the wall firing down at the French, and his musket's lock exploded in his face and blinded him. Philpott was in the chateau itself, firing from a first-floor window, firing again and again at the French without complaint, again and again as it got hotter and hotter, again as even the building itself caught fire and the flames licked around him. He fired over and over and over again, right up until the moment that the floor gave way beneath him and he plunged into the flames. And not once did he complain about the heat. Gam died at the gates after we had closed them, after he'd got back inside. And Guardsman Clay, despite his nerves, fought like a demon. I was hard work, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of what we did. I do not remember how many men I killed. But I am not ashamed. For if we had not done what we had done here today, then Napoleon Bonaparte would have tried to take more, much more, than a farmhouse on a bright summer's day. And how many more would have died then? A soldier is a man who fights for those who cannot fight for themselves. And that's what we did here. We fought for those who cannot. And I am not ashamed of that. I am proud of it. Proud of them. Proud of my lads. And I will remember them. I will. Brooker, Philpott, McGregor, Lester, Gam, and Guardsman Matthew. I will